The title we will be discussing today is With the End in Mind by Catherine Mannix, and here is just a brief excerpt. The vigil around a deathbed is a common sight in palliative care. In some families, it is peaceful. In some, there are rotas and care for the carers, as well as care for the dying. In some, there is vying for position, most bereaved, most loved, most needed, most forgiven. In many, there is laughter, chatter, and reminiscence. Others are quieter, sadder, more tearful. In some, there is only a solitary sitter. Occasionally, it is we staff who keep the vigil because our patient has no one else. So I had seen it many times before I had the perspective-changing experience of sitting at the bedside of someone I loved dearly and would miss greatly for the first time. Our reviewer today is Dr. Chin-Lin Ching. Dr. Ching first came to Rochester for her undergraduate studies at the University of Rochester. She then stayed at the U of R for medical school as well as her internal medicine residency. She is board certified in internal medicine as well as hospice and palliative medicine. She has been a physician at Highland Hospital for 8 years and just recently became the chief of palliative care at Highland Hospital. And we please ask that you join us in welcoming Dr. Ching to our podium.
Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm very honored to be here today to talk to you about this book, and also I didn't realize today was such a special day for this program. So that's just a little bit of myself, and I know that some of you may not know what palliative care is as a specialty, so I wanted to take a moment in the beginning to talk about really what it is. I think a lot of people associate palliative care with hospice. Hospice is a very important part of what I do, but it really isn't all of what I do. I try to compare hospice and palliative care like squares and rectangles for those of us who are math nerds. So just like all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares, all of hospice is palliative care, but not all palliative care is hospice. In my mind, the ideal of what I could help a patient with is when you are first diagnosed with a serious illness and you are living a good and normal life, you are introduced to me, so that as your disease progresses and as that disease begins to affect your quality of life or the way that you live, we continue talking, and we continue talking about decisions that need to be made in your healthcare, how that affects your life, symptom management so that you can live as well as you can for as long as you can. With each hospitalization, your life changes. And as the disease progresses, your life changes as well. So a palliative care physician should be that person in your healthcare, in your life, who can travel on that journey with you until the end, because we are all going to die at some point. And most of us are going to die from our serious illnesses, our terminal conditions. And wouldn't it be wonderful to have someone to talk through all of those changes as things happen, instead of during an emergency, in the middle of an emergency department, or in the middle of an ICU, where everything is in crisis and everything is very emotional. So that is the ideal. The book that I'm going to be talking about today is With the End in Mind. It was written by a palliative care provider from England. So Catherine Mannix, the author, is a palliative care physician in England. And the book is really lots of little vignettes. So she tells stories of patient encounters. And within those little vignettes, she introduces us to patients that she has encountered throughout her career. And I think each story, each patient represents a different patient population. The young cancer patient, the old Parkinson's patient, and everything in between, and every different way that a patient can cope with a serious illness. So I think the vignettes are actually quite interesting. Bring some tissues. I tried reading this book in Starbucks, and I had to hide in the corner with my tissue box. So some of them are really moving and very touching. What is also, I think, really great about the vignettes and the stories is broken up in between. She comes through in her own voice as a physician to talk to you, the reader. So the vignettes are an introduction to a story, and then there'll be paragraphs with a different font that tells you that now she's speaking to you as the reader. And she will start asking you questions. How do you think of your life? What are some fears that you've had about your dying? And it sparks conversation. So I believe that the goal of her writing this book is to start a very important conversation about dying. And we do live in an age of denial. And she wrote very poignantly in a page here, and I'll just read a brief passage. Palliative care is not solely concerned with dying. Excellent symptom management should be accessible to people of all diagnoses at any stage of their illness when they require it. That is the broad remit of the specialty of palliative medicine. The majority of our patients, however, are in the last months of their lives, and this gives us a particular insight into the way people live when they know that they are dying. It is that part of our experience that I am seeking to convey in these stories. How the dying, like the rest of us, are mainly getting on with living. It's time to talk about dying. This is my way of promoting the conversation. And she does. And throughout this book, as she tells stories about her patients, she interjects herself with thoughts that hopefully will ignite your own thinking and your own conversations around the dining room table. And I think that that is the purpose of this book. We live in a healthcare system where, and training as a physician, I learned a way of treating diseases: cure, treatment, prolong life. I think as medicine has progressed and advanced, we are getting to a point where we are no longer prolonging life, and we are actually prolonging death. And when we reach that point, when we are no longer prolonging life, but we are prolonging death, is a very personal point for each of us. And I think our hope is in the palliative care field that we can be partners with each of our patients in finding that point. It is a very distinctive point. So I find that palliative medicine as a career has been a very good combination of my love of literature and philosophy and medicine. I found this special niche in medicine where I can wax poetic about life and death with my patients. And it's a very special specialty. The one thing that I wanted to mention about this book is that because it was written by a British physician, she uses a lot of jargon that we may not be familiar with in America, in American medicine. And within this national health system, it was very clear to me as a physician that the way she practices medicine is very different from the way I practice medicine. She has access to a lot of things that I don't have access to here. Palliative care as a specialty is so much more advanced in England because of the national healthcare system that they have. They are decades ahead of us in terms of having these conversations and allowing our patients and our community to have access to this specialty. I'm sure many of you have never heard of palliative care, and you don't even know that there are palliative care programs in every hospital we have here in Rochester. How do you even get it, right? And that's what I'm always asked when I meet people. How did I never know you existed? Many reasons, but one of that is that all of our healthcare dollars are spent towards interventions. I don't cut people open. I don't really make money for the hospital. I save money. And I sit and I talk. My daughter asks me what kind of doctor I am, and I always say I'm a talking doctor. My husband's an x-ray doctor. He's a radiologist. He does things. I sit and I listen. So it requires a total shift in the way we think about medicine and life and death to really begin thinking about palliative care. So it was very evident in reading this that Dr. Mannix is operating in a place where palliative care is very advanced. Luckily, there is actually a glossary in the back, which was very helpful. If you're reading and you're thinking, what is this word? She has a glossary at the end that helps you with certain jargon that she uses. What's a GP? GP is our PCP, our primary care doctor, they call GPs. what's a sister, and they have different terms, and so there's a glossary at the end that's very helpful. Something else that she has, because again, her point of this book is to start conversations about dying, is she has a template for a letter at the end that you can look at. If you are at a point in your life where you're beginning that you want to think about advanced care planning, you want to start this conversation, how do you do it? How do you start having this conversation with your family, with your loved ones? Are there things that you feel that you need to think about or talk about? She actually has a template for a letter that may be helpful in sparking conversation. Is there someone that you've always wanted to say something to that you haven't been able to? So I found that very interesting that she actually has a template in the back that you can look at, again, to spark conversation. And then a list of resources that they have in the UK. We also have resources here in America, and there is a website that is started by the Centers to Advance Palliative Care. It's actually getpalliativecare.org. And if you go there, you can have all the resources that you think you might need to start the conversation. So that is a good place to start. I think that when I was reading this book, I felt like it was a really great representation of what I do every day. My colleagues, even my colleagues that I work with in the hospital, ask me, how do you do this every day? What do you do? What do you talk about? I think that the way she tells her stories is a very good representation of my day-to-day in a hospital. I practice just at Highland Hospital. I have colleagues who also see patients in the outpatient world, but I am just in the hospital, so that's a little different. But the way it works is someone gets admitted to the hospital. They either have very severe symptoms that can't be controlled, or they're nearing the end of life, and there's a big elephant in the room, and no one wants to talk about it. I'm the one they call, I'm the consultant they call to come and sit down and really just sit and talk. What brought you to this point in your life? What are you hopeful for? What are you scared about? How do you want to spend however much time you have left in your life? The life review that I think we all need, that's what I do. And I think that this book really represents what I do on a daily basis. It's very moving. I really appreciated that someone was writing it. At times I wondered what someone who isn't in the field would think, because I was reading as someone who was familiar with all of this. So I think reading this book as a layman may be a little different of an experience, but it really is a nice peek into this profession and what I do day to day. So I would certainly recommend, if you've always wanted to read about what a palliative care physician does, what palliative care is as a specialty, and then also begin that conversation for yourself. I think that this is a really good introduction to it. There are other books out there, I think, that have started the conversation. So books like Atul Gawande's Being Mortal, I think, has been in the media a lot. That kind of started the conversation about end-of-life care in America. There are other books that I've read within the palliative care world. When Breath Becomes Air was written by a surgeon at Stanford, a young surgeon who died from lung cancer. And then one that just came out, The Brightest Hour, written by Nina Riggs, who was a young woman who died from breast cancer. So I think that the books are coming out. The personal stories that I think can touch all of us in one way or another are coming out. I think we need to have this conversation now, more than ever, in America, as our healthcare system changes, our healthcare spending changes, that we don't lose sight of what our values are, because it's really easy to do in our healthcare system. You walk into a hospital, things are going to get done to you before you even have a conversation, before you even see a doctor. And so books like this, I think, are encouraging us to begin having conversations with providers so that everyone knows what your wishes are and what makes sense, so that you don't get lost in the mix. Thank you.